Thank you, everyone. It's great to see how much interest that there is surrounding the state government's recent changes, and obviously property prices and developments that may, I guess, be introduced into this area. So again, my name's Matthew Quattroville, Four Towns Planning. I've been a local town planner on the Northern Beaches for over 15 years. So we'll jump straight into it. I might give you a bit of a rundown first. These are what they call the Stage 2 planning reforms that were introduced on the 28th of February this year. They are introduced and they have been brought out by the state government, not Northern Beaches Council. Stage 1 planning reforms happened last year, which was the introduction of dual occupancies in R2 zone land. That didn't impact the old Manly LGA at all, because dual occupancies were already a permissible land use. So what we have is Stage 2 planning reforms, which are going to sort of have a greater increase and impact on developments that can occur, your floor space ratio, building heights and the like, which are going to change what's existing in the area. All right, so the lower and mid-rise housing policy, Stage 2, has been brought in, which will allow dual occupancies, multi-dwelling housing, which is also includes townhouses, residential flat buildings and shop top housing, only within 800 metres from selected town centres. I have based this presentation mainly on the Manly town centre area. If you are interested, feel free to discuss with me later or contact me, and we can discuss other town centres on the Northern Beaches as well. So the 800 metres walking distance is calculated by the nearest point from your property to the edge of the town centre, which we can see here. If you're at the northern end, sort of up near Queenscliff, it would be sort of to the edge along here, and then obviously these boundaries here. The state policy includes what they call non-discretionary development standards, and these are going to be probably the critical parts that override Northern Beaches planning controls, or the old Manly local environmental plan. So under this, for example, for a residential flat building within the R3 zone, if you're within 400 metres of a town centre, the state policy will allow a 22 metre height limit. Currently in a lot of those areas, it's probably around 11 metres, so you're looking at double the height limit. And then once you go further, anything that's 400 to 800 metres, you're looking at about a 17.5 metre height limit. The non-discretionary development standards are controls that have been brought in by the state government where Northern Beaches Council can't refuse a development application on that basis. So with the non-discretionary development standards, they include floor space ratio control, the height of buildings, as I've just mentioned, lot size, lot width, car parking, and also subdivision controls. This map is just a quick outline. I've sort of tried to tailor this presentation more around the R3 zone land. That's where there's going to be probably the major benefit for these areas. There is a slight increase and allowance for the R1 and R2 zone land as well. Within the Manly Town Centre, majority of the properties are either zoned R3, medium density residential, or R1, general residential land. All right, there are certain properties that are excluded from the state policy. Now, I haven't listed all of them because many of them are not relevant to the Manly area. It does also include bushfire prone land, but again, same thing, that won't apply to sort of any of the properties that do get the additional benefits. The critical, I guess, element within the Manly area that will be excluded are heritage items, or properties that are heritage items. They will be excluded from the state policy and they won't be allowed to utilise those additional provisions through that state policy. Just on top of that, the heritage conservation areas are allowed, or they're permissible within the state policy, but there's still going to be stringent guidelines and framework through the assessment with council with any redevelopments of those sites. Just quickly, as I noted, we're mainly focusing on the Manly Town Centre, but in the Northern Beaches LGA, Balgowlah Stockland Shopping Centre is considered to be a town centre, DY Town Centre, Forestville, Forest Way Shopping Centre and French's Forest Road Precinct, the Manly Town Centre, Manly Vale, Mona Vale and Warringah Mall as well. So all of those areas have been included or identified as a town centre where these rules apply. Other areas that I know a lot of residents were trying to or wanted to be included, Avalon, Newport, Narrabeen and other town centres like that got excluded as they didn't meet specific criteria to be a town centre, and also Northern Beaches Council did have a bit of a pushback on those areas as well. All right, this is just a bit of a review of the different types of housing that is permissible within these zones. We've got a dual occupancy, which is typically is a side-by-side strata development, one dwelling each side. We've got our townhouses and terraces, again, which can either be strated or Torrens titled. And then we've also got the introduction of what they call a manor house, which is in essence, it's a residential flat building with 2 apartments on the ground floor and 2 apartments on the first floor. Then we've got our mid-rise housing, which includes your residential flat buildings, and they can range from 3 stories in height all the way up to 6 stories in height under these new provisions. All right, I haven't done a summary on the dual occupancy multi-dwelling housing controls that have been implemented. They are fairly similar to current controls by council, with the addition of some minor increases to your floor space ratio and an extra metre in building height. Now that would have, that will potentially have an increased benefit for those areas in your R1 zone land. You know, your dual occupancies at a 9.5 metre height limit may then potentially have the potential to go to 3 stories in height. Within the R3 zone area, as quickly mentioned at the start, within 400 metres of a town centre, your floor space ratio now has a maximum of 2.2 to 1. It has a height of building of 22 metres, and it allows a maximum of 6 stories in height. With that, there is also no minimum lot size or width, as some councils have for these larger style developments. Within 400 to 800 of a nominated town centre, the floor space ratio is a maximum of 1.5 to 1, a height of building of 17.5 metres and a maximum of 4 stories in height. Now, in comparison to, I guess, current FSR controls along some of those areas, along the beachfront, you could still achieve 1.5 to 1, so there definitely is an increase in floor space ratio for those sites. In your sites that sort of push back from the beach, they were approximately 0.75 to 1. So that is a massive uplift in floor space ratio allowances under current planning controls with council. Shop top housing is another potential land use that could be applied. Now, with a lot of the residential zones or the R3 medium density zone, the key provision is for it to be mainly residential dwellings, residential flat buildings, townhouses. Now, under Northern Beaches Council or under the Manly LEP, a shop top housing is a permissible land use under the R3 zone. So if that is something you're interested in as well, there could be a provision to argue for ground floor commercial and residential apartments above. Now, with the ground floor commercial, it would have to be a permissible land use within that zone as well. And for example, under the R3 zone, a restaurant or cafe is a permissible land use. Now, there is still objectives and other controls you've got to meet, but it is potentially another option. Now, with shop top housing, the same FSR still applies, but you get an additional 2 metres in building height to 24 metres, and that's purely on the basis that Your ground floor commercial has to meet relevant floor to ceiling heights, which generally result in a 4 metre floor to ceiling for the ground floor. So that's where there's that additional building height. All right, appreciate your time, and look, I'd love to open it up if anyone has any questions.
When's all this coming in?
It's already in.
It's in now.
So it got implemented on the 28th of February. Yeah, look, let's just say it was a bit of a bomb drop by the state government. Not even council or the rest of us were aware that they were about to. We were aware that they were looking at these changes, but it was a Friday afternoon. They dropped the media release, and it's just like, as I think it was on the 14th of February approximately, and it was like in 2 weeks' time, these controls are going to be in place through the state policy. Yeah.
And any allowance for state government for infrastructure, or is it
No.
local councils?
Not at this stage. I know Northern Beaches Council has been very vocal, and I know that the councillors have, and Michael Reagan as well, the state member, has written to the minister requesting urgent action on the basis of infrastructure. Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
You mentioned stage 1. You said this is stage 2. Will there be a stage 3?
Not at this stage. No. There was. It was stage 1 was to get started. To me, in a way, it was, a lot of it is very politically motivated. Stage 1 was to get action going with dual occupancies and that lower style density in your residential zones. Stage 2 was this higher capacity, which included your residential flat buildings and lights. So no, there is no further reforms that we're aware of. Yep.
You mentioned the 1.5 ratio. Does that include underground parking?
No, it doesn't. No.
Excluded.
Excluded, correct. So yeah, look, again, I can discuss all that after if you like, but the way the FSR is calculated is under what they call gross floor area. There's certain components. So if you've got basement car parking, that's as per the allowances of the LEP, then those areas do not get included in your GFA calculations.
Also, one further question. You said 400 metres. Is that walking distance or direct?
Correct. So that's walking distance, and it's got to be a reasonable walking path as well. So if, for example, I had someone yesterday contact me about a site in North Manly. They're close to the Warringah Moortown Centre. Does everyone know the overhead bridge pass that you've got to utilise? They had measured it through the old pedestrian crossing that would have been at the lights, which is incorrect. So it's got to be a reasonable walking path, which includes lights. If there's no lights, then it would be just your normal walking across the street. Yeah.
What street is it on Pittwater Road as the northern point to the Manly Town Centre?
It's just before Carlton Street.
That's the town centre, you mean?
Yeah, so that component there is the town centre that's here, and then that's Carlton Street there.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
Raglan,
whatever it might be there.
That's where your town centre finishes, on Raglan, right?
Yeah, but so Raglan Street's down here, but they've included the strip of shops that go all the way down here to near Carlton Street.
So it's politically driven. Is there any way this will ever get reversed?
Potentially, yes. You never know with town planning controls, and state governments have got different agendas. So my advice for people, look, the perfect example is my dad back in the mid-90s. He did a dual occupancy in the old Warringah Council area. By, I think it was 98 or 99, that loophole had shut, and it's been 26 years since that was a permissible land use in the R2 zone. So, look, Northern Beaches Council, they're currently preparing a draft Northern Beaches Local Environmental Plan, which is going to combine Manly, Warringah and Pittwater planning controls into one document. That's envisaged to come out by the end of this year, and that's going to go on public exhibition. And the whole intent of that is to, I guess, combine the 3 council areas, make it simplified. They're going to include floor space ratio controls for the entire Northern Beaches. Currently, there's only floor space ratio controls for the Manly area for residential dwellings and the like. So there is going to be a lot of changes occurring. There's going to be provisions on dual occupancies for minimum lot sizes and the like. So in terms of your lower densities, such as your dual occupancies, townhouses, These controls really only relate within 800 metres of town centre, so the rest of, I guess, the area on the Northern Beaches doesn't really get impacted too much. But yes, it is something that I understand Northern Beaches Council have looked at. I do know that one of the critical things for them is infrastructure, obviously for a lot of residents as well. So it is something that there is a lot of pushback. So it is something that could be reviewed in the future and densities could be looked at. For example, many of you may be aware, or it's currently being demolished at the moment on the corner of, I think it's Raglan Street there, the Two Tides development. Those areas there are approximately a 15 metre height limit. You can now go, pretty much 50 metres down the road and you could do a 22 metre development, which doesn't make sense. So there could be a review in the future. It could change. We don't know. Yeah.
Has there been a change to the minimum lot size for a dual lock?
Within 800 metres of a town centre, it's 450 square metres. Currently in Warringah, there is no minimum lot size. We can only assume that potentially by the 1st of July, that's going to change to potentially 800 square metres. Within the Manly area, it's going to stay as what the current provisions are. Yeah. And with that, with the draft Northern Beaches LEP, the provision of dual locks is only going to, from what we understand, will only relate to R2 zone land. So that's where they're critically, they're concerned about, 400, 500 square metre lots in Allambie Heights, French's Forest, popping up with dual occupancy. So that's where they're looking to bring those controls in. Yeah.
Will there be any environmental development controls set by the government for things such as view loss, overshadowing, setbacks for
They will all still be a part of the development process. So these non-discretionary standards are something council can't refuse it on, but council will still have to assess it on other controls that apply for the site. With residential flat buildings, there's also the apartment design guidelines that they've got to be built to as well. Yep.
Where you've got most of the land is R3 and R1 zoning.
Mm-hmm.
You've got R3 sitting like directly next to or adjacent to an R1.
Mm-hmm.
What happens, or what are the protections in place for R1 if R3 goes and puts up a 8-storey building and the rest of us are limited to 2 stories?
Yeah, correct. Like I just sort of mentioned, there are controls that council will have to view during that assessment process, such as view loss, access to sunlight, setbacks and things like that. So that would all be a part of the development process or the development application assessment by council.
But it still doesn't stop them going ahead and taking it to state government anyway, like the Royal Far West.
This one can't go to the state government, or unless they accumulate that much land that it's over $60 million, then it would become state significant development. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of these projects would be assessed by Northern Beaches Council.
With doing whatever they wanted to do.
Mm.
Yeah. And so will they still need to be, adjacent owners still need to be notified of any development?
Correct. It'll be as per any current development application lodged with Northern Beaches Council. There will be a notification period. There will be the internal assessment from council's expert teams such as engineers, heritage and the like. And then obviously council's assessment officer would also take a review.
What's the increased population projected for the next 10 years in
this area or all?
Because of this, is it doubling? Is it?
Yeah, look, Northern Beaches Council, my understanding is Northern Beaches Council, I think by 2030 has, I think it used to be 5,000, but it may be up to 10,000 population growth that they want in the area. That's from the state government, yeah.
From a base of?
I don't know.
30? Yeah, but 40 now and then 10 more.
What do you mean by that?
What is it now? What's the base?
Easily 40.
Easily
It's
40.
about 50 now. Yeah.
50 now and then 10 more, maybe.
Do you mean in increasing
population? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. That would be state government and council. Yeah.
What are the provisions, if any, for low-cost housing where developers might be incentivised to put that in? Is that part of it?
Correct. There is a 30% uplift in developments if you want to include affordable rental housing in it. Up to 30% increase, yes.
Do you think developers will do that if they can just, they're not going to be able to sell those at a price that makes it valid for them to build?
Correct. Look, I've had a fair few, I guess, discussions with developers. A lot of them don't believe that the affordable rental housing is affordable for them, I guess, per se. The construction and build cost is fairly astronomical as it is, and that's where you do see, I guess, a lot of pushback with elements like that. Yeah.
I know with Coringo Council, because they've been through all of this already, with the affordable housing, they had a loophole that the developers would pay a certain percentage to the state government to actually forego that need for the affordable housing, but still be able to build it, so they were still getting revenue and still be able to build that and then sell them at normal prices. Is that something that's still potentially?
I don't know if that's on the table with Northern Beaches Council. There has been a lot of policy and policy changes over the years that 100% developers used to use that loophole, and it would go into a state government fund for affordable housing where state government developers such as Landcom and other ones would utilise that money to build new projects. So it may be something that they look at, but I'm not too sure. I'd have to triple check.
So based off your conversations with developers, what kind of properties are you thinking about for Manly in Manly?
I've only had a discussion with one developer for properties in Manly at this stage. There obviously is, I guess the largest interest is going to be in the Manly area, in the R3 zone area. Within Northern Beaches, your real only other R3 zone land near town centres there's a little bit in Manlyvale. There's obviously quite a bit in DY, but DY is already sort of at a density and capacity where there's not too many more properties that could be, I guess, demolished sort of for affordable reasons, and dealing with residential flat buildings that have got 16 to 20 owners. That makes it difficult as well. So I do know that the Manly area is going to be a keenly interest area for these increased in heights and development potential.
Will CDC applications be the same?
So you can do a CDC for a dual occupancy, so that still will apply. The non-discretionary standards under this state policy don't apply for a CDC. If you currently want to use these controls, they have to be through a development application to Northern Beaches Council. Yeah.
I get the impression that you think we should all be excited about this change. I just believe there's a lot of people, developers and that, yes, will be excited, investors, yes, but there's a lot of people that live here that don't want it, full stop.
No, and I 100% agree. Obviously I'm here to just give a bit of information of those changes. I totally get the personal approach. A lot of people have been in the area for ages. Obviously there's potential for significant change. And unfortunately that's, I guess, sort of the world we live in at the moment with the requirement for housing, and I guess there's no right or wrong way at this stage of trying to increase densities whilst, I guess, sort of that urban crawl where we're taking up more and more land. So it's definitely a difficult one, in particular that it's been driven by the state government without any real, I guess, involvement from Northern Beaches Council. I understand Northern Beaches Council are scrambling because, a lot of things about infrastructure, increased densities, they've spent a lot of time to come up with their local environmental plans, which, implement town centres and livable areas. So it's something that I'm very interested myself when the first development applications for areas like this do come out, to see how council approaches it, how they assess them, and obviously how the community react as well.
council grinding things to a halt, just for the sake of it? You know, the rules are pretty clear from the state government.
Look,
they're
they're
not exactly fast at getting things through as it stands. You know, do you see them grinding things to a halt?
You just don't have the right town planner. No, look, with the stage 1 planning reforms within the Warringah LEP, I actually got the first dual occupancy approved in freshwater. I spent a lot of time working with council to understand what they're going to be looking for, what they're going to accept. You know, their comments were pretty much, look, whilst it wasn't something we thought was going to, you know, be thrown at them, and they didn't have any planning controls at the moment for dual occupancies in those areas, they sort of based it on, well, what are the current planning controls for Warringah LGA? So, your 8.5 metre building height, 40% landscaping, your setbacks, your wall height controls and things like that. So, council was open to it on the basis that they, as long as it was a compliant design with current planning controls, they were open to accommodating that new style of development in the area. So with this one, in particular with the resi flat building, it's going to be very different because there's so many other parameters compared to a dual occupancy or a townhouse, a 2-storey building or 3-storey building that they're going to have to factor in. So look, your larger style developments are always generally longer, and it is going to come down to how architects design them, and obviously consideration of things such as views, access to solar and bits and pieces like that.
You talked about the manor house, or manor, which is what, 2 up, 2 down?
Yeah, correct.
What sort of square metres are you talking for that sort of building?
So with that one there, I believe it's, I don't have it with me. I think I've got it at the back on a piece of paper, but it might be 0.8 to 1 FSR for a manor house. Yeah. Appreciate your time and coming tonight. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matt. You can all agree, I think it was some great information. He mentioned also that he was surprised. I actually live on the flat known, so I've been quite interested in this topic as well. And I must admit I wasn't surprised by him studying property development and watching it and heard rumours this was going to happen. So, and obviously it did happen. I was trying to tell some friends of mine should move down to the flat of Manning because I think it's going to change. But of course, until it happened, no one really knew. But basically, yeah, for those who don't know, my name's Adam Moore. I'm co-owner of the business with Candice Cattell here. We just want to say thank you for coming tonight. We realise it can be a bit of a complicated subject, but we hopefully, with good people like Matt, we can simplify this. And I guess if you're interested, I know like property development, as I said, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's good to be aware of what's happening. I'll talk to you about later even what I'm potentially thinking of doing. So I think for a lot of these people, it's nice to know, yes, you can do more with your property, but you may not want to move from your area, which is of course understandable as well. But I think you're silly to just ignore it, and you better know what's going on and be informed. So the other thing I was going to talk to you about today is from a real estate perspective, just what the changes are we've seen already in the values of property since these changes have come in, and what we think is going to happen in the future. So as I said, the increases in property price from these changes depended on, I see, 3 main factors. One is the zoning of your property. As Matt touched on, the R3 seems to have the biggest, I guess, changes, which I think will also see the biggest rise in values, because you're looking at, example on the flat, as he mentioned, some places have gone from a 0.75 FSR, which stands for floor space ratio, up to a 2.2, which is a massive change. Given, for example, if I join with my neighbour and we're sitting on a 400 square metre block, what that means in real terms, you used to have around 300 of internal space. Now you're looking at sort of 2.2 times that, so you're looking at more like 880. So it's a massive change, and of course double the height. The R2 and R1 have had changes, but not as significant. Secondly, the proximity to a town centre. This is for the R3 zone, which you already touched on. And it depends whether you're within 400 metres or 800 metres of the town centre. Now, there's a map which we'll talk about later. It's indicative, but I'll give you some streets to sort of look at as locals will mean a bit more to you, rather than just those changes. And of course, the other thing is the condition, age, size, and whether the property has views. So, for example, I think the big upside is for older houses, because with the cost of building, you're not going to necessarily demolish a big beautiful new house, to get a little bit more size, especially outside of the R3. Okay, so this is a case study in Manly we had recently. I won't give out the address for confidentiality reasons, but how this can affect it, and this is the first case I've seen of it. We've had a property that was offered a certain figure last year. This year, since the changes, the site's been offered an additional $9 million. That's not the price, that's an extra $9 million on top of what they were offered last year. So it represents a 60% increase. That was in an R3 zone. So that's sort of for your prime stuff, but that's just one example that has occurred since these changes in the last month. But so yeah, it can make a significant. I'm not saying not saying everyone in this room's house is now worth more than 60%. So don't go and splurge just yet. But it's got potential. But psychologically, you might feel a bit wealthy. But as you said, if you love where you live, you're not moving. It's a little bit irrelevant. But nice to know. Okay, so the second thing is proximity to the town centre. I wanted to give, this is the R3 zone here, which Matt touched on, in the pink. So that's where you get the biggest upside. You do have upside in your R1s, but not as significant. So trying to put that in for the locals' knowledge, if you look at it at the north, Pine Street is the differentiator between the 400 zones. Once you go past Pine Street north, you're in the 400 to 800 zone. So the biggest. And the other, on the south side, is Ashburn Street. One side of Ashburn Street is R3, and the other's not. It's in the R1. So basically, this is the part of the town that's got up the most. This is also doing well down here, and it goes all the way up to sort of just past Stella Maris. Euroban's not included in the R3, but you can see where that is there. And there's a guide, if you go onto the state government website, called the LMR guide, and it gives you a map, but it does have a disclaimer saying it's indicative. And as Matt said, it's all about walking and which way you go to get there. So there's been some cases now with developers where they have to, measure it and video themselves measuring it with tape measures. And it's one of those things, if you miss, it's the perimeter of the site too. So it's from the perimeter, not a central point. But if you miss it by a couple of metres to your site where you're out, it could make a big difference in your value. The third thing is the age, condition, size, aspect, and whether the property has water views. I said, these reforms likely to benefit older and lower quality buildings. Something that's going to be renovated or extension anyway, well, it's quite good because they can do more on the site. But if you've got a nice home in a standard residential area, it's probably not, when I've done the numbers, looking at knocking it down. So the changes that people out there are worried about, the changes, I think outside of the R3, it's going to be more subtle changes, more old places. It's not like every house is going to be getting knocked down and putting up high-rise, so I wouldn't go into mass panic about that. And for the R3 zones, that's where the profit's going to be, and it's going to have a track where people are going to get offered big money for their homes, because we have a thing that's called GFA, or gross floor area, the saleable floor area, and for resales now, you're looking at around, for new product in this area, it's anywhere between 30,000 to roughly 75,000 per square metre. So if you've got a property, if you imagine, and you can make it bigger, your building costs are sort of between 8,000 to 15,000 square metres. So every square metre you can add on your dwelling, obviously you're making a profit, significant profit in this area. I'll give you an example where I live in Denison Street. I'm potentially looking at putting it, with these rules, a 2-bedroom flat on top of where I live. I don't necessarily want to move, but I think one thing which is great for the community, which people may not have thought about, is, for example, say my parents, I'm on the flat, say one of them passes, I want to put my mum, I can build a 2-bedroom unit potentially. I'm talking with Matt about it, on top of my dwelling. My mum could live there, have a lift, or for my children, if they can't afford to live in the area, so you've got a home, you may be able to do some multi-generational dwellings in your area if you go to strata. Now, I'm having a consultation with Matt. Yeah, well, I guess, okay, I haven't had approval from the wife about my mum moving in. I'm sort of just breaking it to everyone now, so she can't say no. Yeah, she's coming, didn't you know? Okay. Anyway, yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention it to my wife. But, so I think there could be some nice things where you could see some multi-generational housing, under strata, on your existing thing, which I think would be good for the area, because I think it is going to be a problem for a lot of people around here that have a nice home, but their children can't afford to live, or may want parents to come and live with them. And I'll give you an example on that too. I did the numbers as well. If I work off about 10,000 square metre to put a 2-bedroom unit on top of my home. If I say it's 10,000, it costs me, let's call it 800,000 to build. but the saleable value, I'm going with no views, is probably 30,000 a square metre. So it's probably worth about 2.4 million for an 800,000 investment. Not that I'm going to realise that and actually sell it, but it's just nice to know I'm not over-capitalising on your own dwelling. So that's another option. It's not all about trying to say sell. You know, I'm just trying to give you some ideas that you might not have thought about what you could do with your current dwelling. And are these reforms permanent? Now, Matt touched on this. The answer is no. They're not guaranteed forever. You know, changes in a government or public backlash or council concerns about the infrastructure will be heard. I think particularly I've heard they're worried about places like, you know, DY, which are already stressed, and that could become a really bottleneck area if you get a lot more houses here. I don't think it'll be as big a problem in Manly. You have the ferry and more ways to get people in and out quickly. And look, I guess if you're interested, I would act sooner rather than later. And not that you have to do it, but you may want to consider getting an approval. And I think Matt gave his example before about how his dad got a dual lock site done, and now that hasn't been allowed for the last 25 years. So, you know, you would kick yourself if you didn't do some of these or act on this or look into it at least. And then it was taken away, you know, in a few years in the next election. So in conclusion, what can you do? Our recommendation, one, is seek advice from our guest, Matt Quattroville, from For Towns Planning, to understand the potential of your property and talk about what you could potentially get done. So what I'm actually personally doing with Matt, I've given some concepts. Obviously, it's his interpretation of the plans, and I'll probably get some sketches done, and then we might even do what's called a pre-DA meeting with the owners of the council, just to see if they're in the same headspace before you go and waste a lot of money, you know, doing plans that they're never going to approve. So I think that's, if you were thinking about that, that's something you could consider. Two is speak to us at Australian Manly, understand what the reforms and how they've increased the value of your property, because you want to make sure it is going to add some value and the costs, and we can help with that, whether you're actually going to sell it or just keep it or want to move on. The other option is you could talk to your adjoining neighbours and just say, look, this opportunity's happen, are you interested? Because the bigger the sites get, the more valuable they are, especially if you can get to we're speaking with Matt, a 20 metre width site, then you can go down underground, have a really good parking setup. So if you've got, for example, if you're in an old semi or an old house and you had the neighbours next to it thinking about doing something similar, it may be worth, if you want to either sell or develop, or there's, you know, code deals you can do with developers. But the bigger the site you can create, generally the more value comes to town and attracts bigger developers with bigger pockets if you want to sell. Considering, as I said, doing a development application after stages 1 and 2, if that's something you'd like to consider, or it's just good knowledge. And 4, I said, look, we've got a great database of developers that if you want at the end of the day that we can put you in touch with, and then we can get some offers on your site either pre-DA or after if it's something you consider selling. So that's another option as well, which we did with another client, and they've actually said got another 9 million for their site, so they're happy. And I said, look, if you want a private discussion about your property, we're just saying later you can text the words interested to this number, it's my number there, 0401 197540, and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. We're going to be around tonight if you want to chat, but that's about it really. And I just want to say thank you for all coming and thank you for your time.